When I first started playing Pathfinder 2nd Edition, I looked at the math of bows and went, wow, why would anyone ever play those? And now that I understand the system a lot better, my opinion has changed. Hello folks, Phil Gallagher, aka Thraben, you here for another Pathfinder 2nd Edition video, and welcome to Broken Bow Builds. Let's do the businessy stuff before I get started here. I'm going to have videos every Friday on this channel. If you like what you see here today, please subscribe. It is a very easy way to support me for free. I'm hoping to have Commander and Guardian stuff up on the channel as soon as I get my early release copies for that, and maybe some Starfinder stuff too. We'll kind of see where the channel goes. Financial support from you all is very important to keeping this content going. The YouTube ad revenue on this channel is not all that great right now. It doesn't pay me anywhere near my hourly rate. So thank you to everyone who is supporting me via YouTube memberships. There's 40 of you now, and that means a lot. That is literally what is keeping me making this content. So thank you. If you want to fund a video idea or sponsor the channel in any way, my email is here. Feel free to reach out. And without further ado, let's get into the actual content. So, today we're going to talk about why bows are bad. Because in some ways they are. And then we're going to talk about how bows are actually quite good and start showing off all of the various ways, well, maybe not all, but a lot of the various ways that you can look to power up your bow builds. Let's get into it. All right. So, when I first started looking at the system, I looked at the damage of a bow and to a lesser extent, ranged options, and I was like, what is going on here? It's so low. And damage is not going to be what bows are about. At least not the damage that is written on the weapon. It takes a little while to really get this, but the best bow in most cases, not every case, but in most cases, is actually just a short bow. It just does serious work and does not have any penalties associated with it. Are you able to get a higher damage die? Yeah, absolutely, but that might come with something like reload or maybe volley, meaning you take a penalty if you are at short range. So the good old short bow has a d6 of damage, and you don't get to add your strength modifier or your dex modifier to that. Meaning, at your 1d6 of damage, you are clocking in at 3.5 average damage on a regular hit. Now, if you do get a critical hit, you've got a deadly d10 that is going to bump up that damage a little bit, and that will be quite noticeable. But when you compare that to Strength Martial damage, a Strength Martial with a two-handed weapon is hitting for 1d12 plus 4. That is 10.5 damage, like triple of what the bow build would be doing. And if you have a shield or you need a free hand for something, that's still 1d8 plus 4 at an average of 8.5 damage. So either way, you are looking at double to triple the base damage output of a bow build. But this is a video that I called something like Busted Bow Builds, so there must be something to these ranged options that makes them compete with what the Strength Marshals have going on. And if Pathfinder 2nd Edition is good at one thing, it is balance. The math of the system tends to be pretty darn good, and most of the balance decisions make a lot of sense. So let's start actually diving into this. And I think a good place to start from is action economy. Because your strength marshals, or really any marshals, are going to be using actions to approach the enemies most of the time. And there are feats that make doing so more attractive, right? Your things like sudden charge that let you stride, strike, 3 actions, at a rate of a 2-action ability. And they have reasons to approach because they have that high damage and feats that make them faster. But it is still using actions to approach those enemies. And you, as a ranged marshal, will rarely need to move. Will you need to move sometimes? Yeah, there are going to be things like cover or partial cover that you need to think about. More so at some tables, the more strictly you enforce the partial cover, the more you might need, or at least would want to consider, moving. But generally speaking, you can attack from a distance and use very few actions to move relative to the marshals. And beyond that, it's not just the PC's own movement to think about, it is the enemy's actions to Think about. If your strength marshal walks up to an enemy, that means that that enemy does not need to use an action approaching the strength marshal. And your strength marshal might not have great things to do from a distance, meaning that if they win initiative, in many cases, they might end up going and attacking, or delaying their turn and letting the enemy walk to them and waste the enemy's actions, whereas you don't need to do that sort of stuff. So in some cases, you might be netting two actions by playing a ranged character. You might be saving your own action to move, and you might be saving an enemy action to move. And this process may end up repeating over time, so that over the course of a longer combat, say a 5-round combat, you might save 4 or more actions over the course of that combat by playing a ranged character who can kind of just turret in place. And so this action economy thing is like maybe not immediately obvious on the surface, but once you have played the game for a while and you start really thinking about the tactics and like trying to tax actions without using like spell slots or abilities, movement has a lot of nuance in the system, and being a ranged marshal lets you play with that nuance a little bit more. And so if you are not using your extra actions to move around the field, then that means that you can use them in other offensive ways. This can be to activate stances, cast focus spells, use strike plus actions that take 2 or more actions. This can allow you to maybe, demoralize someone, recall knowledge, take aid actions, this sort of stuff. And so while the damage gap on paper begins as being very, very high, since you end up with these extra actions, you can use those actions to sort of mitigate the difference between the strength marshal's damage output and your damage output. And so while there is unquestionably and objectively a damage gap between what a ranged character is capable of doing and what a melee character is capable of doing, the gap is not crazy big like it might initially appear. And if you want to narrow that gap, you should be stacking up different damage sources. You want to find things that make your strikes better in some capacity. And if you're going to try to optimize for damage here, you probably want something from your class and then something from an archetype as well to really make it pop off and make yourself into a dangerous little turret that can sit back and throw up some stacked damage. And in some ways, the longer the combat goes, the more of these things you might be able to tack on. You might not have room in your action economy to set up everything you are doing in a single turn, but after 2 or 3 turns, you should be set up and ready to go. So now let's discuss options for what you can do to actually increase your damage here. The first one is pretty easy. There are some bows with the propulsive trait, and this allows you to add half of your strength modifier to damage rolls with a ranged weapon. And this is pretty cool. Now, I want to caution people here because I think this is a spot where you can potentially ruin your character. Let me explain. So let's say you are starting your campaign at level 5. It is very easy for you to max out your dex and then put 4 into strength so that you get to add 2 to every single one of your damage rolls. And if you are treating Pathfinder 2E as a war game or as a video game where combat is the only thing that matters, then that could be an optimal thing for you to do. However, as a reminder, strength only contributes to athletics. And so if you are going in on strength when you are not using it as your primary stat, dex is going to be used for your accuracy here, then you are not contributing to your skills by adding all of that damage to strength. And those 2 points of strength that you are trying to add to up your damage could be going towards your saving throws instead, or could be going towards your various role-playing skills instead. So propulsive is objectively a good way to add hyper-consistent damage to your character, But your experience in going max dex or strength on a character might be very different in, say, the Donsbury Days video game than it might be at your table where you are actively making skill checks and doing role playing. So this one is easy, but maybe the +1 you get from 2 strength is fine here. And you should be looking for something that gives you some sort of damage boost. Now, some of these things, like most of what you see here, are going to be some amount of flat damage that you get to add to your strike. Some of these are going to require actions to set up in some capacity, and some of them aren't. I'm not going to deep dive every single one of these, or this video would get really long, but an overview of things you can be thinking about. The Inventor gets to add some flat damage to strikes after succeeding at a crafting check. The Thaumaturge can add damage versus the target of their exploit vulnerability. Now, we're going to do a side tangent here. In the most raw reading of the Thaumaturge stuff, you can't really do a traditional bow with how their abilities work. Long story short, they require a hand free. There is some degree of debate about the intention of the ammunition thaumaturgy feat to allow you to use a regular bow, but raw, it really is written to work with crossbows. There's some Reddit posts available about this topic. If you're interested, feel free to dive in more. Note that the Barbarian Rage is not going to work on bows. The Barbarians specifically have a Raging Thrower feat that you can use to do a lot of the same theory that we're working with today, but it is on thrown weapons instead, hence I'm going to mention it here. The Exemplar has a couple of ranged icons, one of which adds some flat spirit damage, and the other, I believe, is a die roll. I think it's 1d4 of spirit damage under certain circumstances. Those are called Star Shot and Unfailing Bow if you want to look into their exact text. And Gunslingers have some flat damage added to guns and reloading crossbows. There are other things that aren't exactly flat damage. So the Rogue has Sneak Attack, which allows you to add some extra precision damage onto strikes, and you are allowed to do that with ranged weapons as well. While monks are traditionally hand-to-hand fighters, there are feats that you can take, such as monastic weaponry and the monastic archer stance, that can allow you to be a monk who can use flurry of blows on ranged attacks. And we're going to loop back to this idea in a minute. We'll loop back to sneak attack as well, honestly. If you are not necessarily worried about having a big turn every turn, Magus can do spell strikes at range. And it is possible for a ranged Magus to spell strike every single turn. It might not be optimal to do that, but it is certainly possible. And the Ranger has a lot. You know, obviously the Ranger being one of the premier ranged classes, that makes sense. A Precision Edge Ranger can add, I believe, 1d8 damage the first time they hit a target in a turn. Gravity Weapon is some bonus damage. That's very easy to snipe via archetypes. And if you have an animal companion, sometimes their support actions can add a meaningful amount of damage, especially the bear companion. And investigators can add their precise strike damage. Now, in terms of theory here, I think if you combine any two of these things, you are probably going to end up with a pretty cool character. And this is probably a good moment to mention that there is just straight up an archer dedication that you can pull from that gives you a pretty reasonable stance, as well as critical weapon specialization for bows. And if you are looking to build a cool bow build, there is a decent chance that you will end up dipping into archer. And we're now going to talk about some feats that come from archer as well as elsewhere, as we sort of launch into various combos that you can do that kind of make these range builds pop off. Cool combo number one that we're going to talk about involves the Rogue's Sneak Attack. Now, there's kind of this problem with Sneak Attack. It has a requirement. Your target needs to be off guard. And for melee characters, that's often really, really easy. You just go, you get flanking with a friend, and then you get your juicy sneak attack damage. But that doesn't happen at a distance. So if you want to be a ranged rogue, you need a plan for how you are going to get your target off guard. And this often relies on your allies. They'll do things like take the Dread Striker feat that allows them to make targets off guard if they have the Frightened condition. But what if we just circumvent all of that? And this is where Parting Shot from the Archer dedication, or you can get this from the Fighter archetype as well, comes in. You take a step and then you strike, and the target is automatically off guard. This is called Parting Shot, and it's very, very good. So this is a 2-action activity. So instead of using one skill action of some kind to maybe make your target off guard, this just always succeeds. Super consistent step, then strike, make your attack, off guard, no roll involved, no chance of failing a skill action. And this is just an incredibly consistent way to go and increase your damage. And this is probably a good time to mention that the Archer archetype just straight up comes with a damage increase. Point blank stance. We're going to long story short this one. If you are using a short bow, you're going to get a +2 circumstance bonus to damage rolls on targets within that weapon's first range increment, which is 60 feet, which for most cases is the entire map or pretty close to it. So an Archer dedication here can not only give you an incredibly powerful skill action that now you don't need to think about getting targets off guard at all, but it also gives you a flat damage increase. So your character is going to end up with flat damage from point blank stance and sneak attack and guaranteed off guard. Now all of a sudden the damage output of your character is probably very, very respectable. And not only is it respectable, it is also going to be highly consistent. Sometimes rogues do have turns where like they just kind of fail at getting their sneak attack and they make an unimpressive hit. That is not something that is going to happen to you. Next up, let's start thinking about other things you can do with the Archer archetype here. I want you to imagine that you have any damage increase, some class feature that is giving you a damage increase, or maybe it is just simple as the point blank stance of the Archer dedication itself. Well, how about the double shot feat? This allows you to take a shot at 2 different targets, but instead of doing it at your full accuracy, you are doing it at a -2 penalty. So instead of taking 1 shot at full accuracy and then a second shot at a -5, you are taking 2 shots at a -2. Is this going to be good against enemies with incredibly high AC? No, but this is going to be excellent crowd control. So let's imagine that you are fighting against a couple of on-level or below-level enemies. Your chance to hit them is going to be pretty darn good, where taking that -2 penalty is maybe not going to be a deal breaker. And if you have some flat damage that you are adding to that roll, well, all of a sudden you can go bam, bam, maybe with pretty good consistently, hit a target twice, and then apply that flat damage in multiple spots. Are you going to be as good at bursting down one target as, your fighter who can just go strike and then strike again with a D12 weapon? Certainly not, but this is going to be a noticeable damage output as far as the entire fight is concerned. Note here, as you go to higher levels, there is a follow-up feat triple shot that allows you to do a similar thing, but shooting at 3 targets instead, or making multiple attacks against a single target. This next one is one I missed for a very long time. Megaton Strike is essentially a vicious swing, a 2-action activity that gives you an extra damage die if you hit. Now, for a weapon inventor specifically, they are allowed to do Megaton Strike with whatever their weapon innovation is. So if your innovation is a bow, then you can do a 2-action strike for an extra damage die from a distance, which is not something that is very common in Pathfinder. Normally, those extra action or an extra damage die is on melee attack actions. And there is an unstable version of this for yet another damage die. So if you have a big turn, let's say your sorcerer has demoralized someone, their AC is lower, Well, now you can use your unstable version, and your bow that normally doesn't hit that hard is now hitting for 2 more damage die. And this Megaton Strike does continue to scale up as you level up, so that damage will go up over time. Notably, the regular Megaton Strike is repeatable. Your unstable version, you, statistically speaking, are probably only going to do once in a combat, but the regular one is repeatable. So while our rogue friend up here had repeatable off guard with no roll, this character could have repeatable extra damage die. And I want to circle back to the monk to kind of close out this section to talk about the Jalmari Heavenseeker dedication. This is something that follows up the Student of Perfection dedication. And both of these things are going to end up in you getting additional focus spells. That is kind of their focus. Focus. All right. And you can get focus spells like Inner Upheaval that can give you a +1 to your accuracy as well as an additional d6 of damage. And the big payoff for going down this direction is Heaven's Thunder. I think this is either level 6 or level 8. It is a 1-action activity that until the end of your next turn, not your current turn, your next turn, your strikes deal additional thunder and sonic damage equal to the number of damage die. So at that time, that's probably 2 damage die. And since it's doing both of those types, that is 4 additional flat damage. That is a pretty big deal. And if you are combining this with a ranged flurry of blows, this can be a lot of damage that you end up adding to ranged strikes. And so you have the action compression of a monk, and with your extra actions, you can send those into actions like Heaven's Thunder and casting your focus spells. And you can end up doing very respectable damage from a distance. And if enemies happen to be weak to thunder or sonic damage, well, life's even better for you now, isn't it? Phil from the future here. After recording this video, I realized that there was one other thing that I should probably throw out there in terms of beefing up your bow builds, and that is the fact that specific magic items exist. So I'm going to show you how to browse these on Pathbuilder in case you're not super familiar with it. So when you go to add weapon, there is a tab for magic weapons, and well, there's a lot of them, way too many to just kind of casually browse unless you want to make a day of it. So what you want to do is click this little kind of chalice looking icon up in the corner and switch to whatever weapon type you are looking for, in this case bow, and then all of a sudden the list becomes more manageable. Looking at 2 of the lower level ones here, they actually come with some pretty cool abilities. For example, the Hunter's Bow can add an extra d6 of damage when you get a critical hit. And the Split Head Bow is kind of crazy. It has 2 different, well, really 3 different abilities, because it can give you some free HP at the beginning of your turn, every turn asterisk, unless you use one of the abilities that stops this regeneration from happening. It has a 2-action activate ability where you make 2 ranged strikes against separate targets within 50 feet of you, and both of them are done at full accuracy. So that's like a double shot that is just attached to an item. So if you have some flat damage that you can add to attacks, this allows you to kind of distribute that flat damage in different places very, very accurately. And then it also has the 5-headed arrow ability. This one is once a day. The previous one was repeatable. So you make a strike at someone within your first range increment. If it's successful, the arrow deals its damage as normal and then splits into 4 pieces, and you can choose up to 4 other targets within 30 feet of the original target and make a single rage strike against them with your map, comparing the result to each secondary target's AC, which is honestly kind of a wild ability. And if you are looking at doing other ranged builds, there are some pretty cool magical firearms as well. If you are going that route, I am rather fond of the Drake rifle, but I will leave investigating these to you. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of cool bow builds, and I'm really only scratching the surface here. But what I wanted to show today is that expectation and reality are not really the same thing when it comes to what makes range characters good. And even though on the surface it looks like the damage output of ranged characters is going to be really, really bad, if you build them in a way that starts leaning into these sorts of synergies and finds some way to stick some flat damage or bonus damage of some kind onto these ranged strikes, their damage can be pretty respectable while you are getting some degree of cheating on the action economy because you don't need to move up to enemies to get in range to make your strikes. And beyond that, by playing ranged characters, you're also probably taking a little bit of pressure off of your healers who might need to do big burst heals on your fighters and barbarians to keep them up as they are taking a pounding. But if the enemies are wasting a few more actions to get to you, then maybe you save them some of their actions and maybe they get to cast a fireball one round instead of a 2-action heal. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and call it a day. If you have any thoughts about the video or any other cool ranged ideas, throw them down in the comments below. Have a great rest of the day. See ya!